Today, we will try to understand various means of resolving names in Azure. We have seen a couple of videos on DNS in continuation with the same. Today, we'll see name resolution on Azure. Okay, so there are three types of name resolution. What are those? We have Azure provided DNS. All right. We have Azure private DNS zones that we have already seen in previous few videos. And we also have something called custom DNS server. Like we create our Azure, our Active Directory, not Azure one. So there are three ways we can have name resolution. So let's try to understand all three on the basis of a simple scenario. Let's suppose this is our Azure virtual network. Okay, Azure VNet. Now inside the VNet, we have three machines. There is one, this is two, and this is three. What are these machines? These are VM1 is your web app VM1. This is your app server. This is your app server, which is your VM2. And this is our database, which is our VM3 or DBVM inside a virtual network. Okay. Now these resources needs to communicate with each other using domain names instead of IP addresses, right? So how are we going to communicate with the help of these three? Let's try to understand. So let's take the first Azure DNS private zones. What happens in that scenario? If you remember in the previous video, inside, let me create one more box here. This is Azure. So what we do, if we have to create private zone, we have to create DNS private zone, right? This is our Azure DNS private, Azure DNS private zone. And what we will do in this zone, we will add records. And what will records do? Records will simply do, for example, whatever the name of this VM, let's call it, let's call this private zone as e-commerce dot local. Okay, so in this private zone, we are going to add the records. Okay, and these records will simply go ahead and apply on all the virtual network which is linked with this private zone, right? So these are the records here which is listed in this private zone e-commerce.local. So webapp.ecommerce.local, this will point to VM1. appserver.ecommerce.local, this will point to VM2, and this DB for the VM3. And there is a link between this virtual network and this private zone, Azure private zone, so that whenever this VM needs to talk to this guy, this will go and see these records and can easily talk to this VM2. How? With the name, not with the IP. That's how the Azure DNS private zone works. So in this scenario, this is clear, right? Now let's see the Azure provided name resolution. This is private zone. That's how it works. When it is Azure provided, you need not to do anything. This is Azure's built-in free DNS service for internal name resolution. So let me do this. Okay, Now, same scenario, we have done nothing. Now we are talking about the built-in free DNS service for internal name resolution. Internal. So when we deploy this VM, Azure automatically registers their names. For example, this one would be vm1.internal.cloudapp.net. This will be exact same with VM2. Then this is dbvm.internal.cloudapp.net. Whenever we create any resource in Azure, we give them name and it will appear something like this, even with your storage account with any Azure resource, right? So now VM1 can resolve VM2 and DB using these names. Now these names are little awkward, little different, little huge, so not easy to remember, but this is built in, so they have their own criteria, right? So if you're not using anything, it's they have a small environment, it's a basic setup, you can rely on the Azure's built-in DNS service. Now there is third, which is custom DNS server. All right, so in custom DNS server, what you do, you simply create your own DNS server, which means there is this DNS server inside your virtual network with full functionality of DNS role in this server. So all the records are here, right? Like we had in uh, private zone. Now all the records are here. Let me do this. All the records are here in this DNS server, and all these are domain connected because there is also Active Directory, and they can simply go and talk to this DNS server, get all the information, and talk to the relevant virtual machine. If name isn't found, there is a forwarder for unresolved queries to Azure if it is all internal, like 168.63.129.16. That is Azure 168.63.129.16. This is Azure. All right. Now, if there is a scenario where there is on premises, okay, where there is on premises, and in on premises, we also have virtual machines. We have on premises DNS server or maybe Active Directory, and there is a proper connectivity, VPN connectivity, or maybe express route. In that situation, this custom DNS server will also help us because the forwarder can work smoothly, right? Conditional forwarding as well. So there are these three types of name resolution that we can have in Azure, and we can use any one of those as per our requirement. Now there must be some pros, cons, or criteria to choose which one to use. Let's try to understand that from our design architecture perspective. So there are certain criteria that we need to think before choosing one of these. So what are those criteria? The very first is cost. So if we are talking about cost, or let me write down, oh, okay, start one by one. Cost. If we are using private zone, there's a very moderate cost because it's a paid service. In this, you create the zone, the Azure service, and there are transactions happening. But if you're using Azure provided DNS, it's a free of cost. And if you want full power, full advanced settings and customization, that means you are running a custom DNS server, which means there is a cost for the DNS server itself, its maintenance and configurations and a lot of stuff. So it is higher cost. So it depends. First, cost. Second, the custom domain names. If you want custom domain names, you could use DNS private zone easily. You can also use custom DNS server. Well, custom DNS server is customized and you can do almost everything with this. But in Azure provided DNS, which is inbuilt, you cannot customize the name because the prefix is taken care by the Azure. It's a native service. If there is a cross VNet resolution, in that scenario, your Azure provided DNS fails. It cannot do that. However, private zones can do that and custom DNS server can do that until there is a proper connectivity. When we create private zones, we can link it with multiple virtual network and they can go and refer to private zone and talk to their relevant uh, domain names or IP addresses through the name, provided there's a proper connectivity. So cross VNet resolution we need to think for. Then there is one more criteria which is integration with on-prem environment or hybrid environment. Suppose you have, in this situation, your custom DNS server gives you all the functionalities, but your Azure provided DNS, nope, it doesn't give you all the functionalities. It is inbuilt native just for the Azure. However, DNS private zone can give you some limited kind of service. For example, okay, let's talk limited later on. Let's finish the criteria first. And if we talk about ease of use, well, you could say the custom DNS is complex. DNS private zone is little less complex, and Azure provided DNS is absolutely easy. You need not to do anything or everything taken care by Azure. We talk about scalability because Azure is cloud and it has its own scalability. And if you're using that service, DNS private zone, you get full, highly scalable service. Same goes with your custom DNS server, but you have a little more uh, management to take care there. Now, let's talk about limitation that I was talking about. Why the private zone has some limitation when it's integration with the on-premises. The very first thing is, let's say this is, hold on, this is private zones, means it is managed. You're not doing anything. There is no uh, server running, not managed, nothing is happening. It is managed service. You are just creating the DNS zone and applying your records, which means it is for the Azure resources, for the internal scope only. Okay, because this private zone are designed for the internal name resolution. This is Azure service for internal name resolution. But when we create for some reason, then things happen and we would like to connect with our on-premises, maybe some other stuff. So we have to do some kind of way around or some kind of improvisation. Because private DNS zone don't support direct integration with on-premises DNS server like Active Directory domain services. Okay, the very first thing. The second thing is there is no built-in conditional forwarding on this private zone because this is just a zone where you're typing any records. There is no conditional forwarding that you can do. And if you want, there must be DNS forwarder somewhere running on Azure. And there is no direct resolution for on-premises names. This is just for the Azure. However, if you have this kind of VPN connectivity, you would like to resolve some Azure names, you can give conditional forwarder to talk to the private zone, right? Then it can do that, but it cannot go back to on-premises and resolve some names of the on-premises resources through private zones, right? So it is good if you are using just for Azure, you want some kind of customization, but for the cloud related resources, always go with the private DNS zones. If you have a small environment where inbuilt Azure provided DNS is good enough and you also have cost constant, go with it. But if you have a little big environment, you want to have governance, proper governance, everything should be in place with advanced settings, everything, always use with the custom DNS server, right? So with this, I think we are good and we can close this session. Thank you for watching, and you guys have a wonderful day. Bye bye.